Hello and welcome to the Uprising Show. And today I have a person with a very diverse background, a very diverse career path to entrepreneurship, Aasim Saeed. Aasim, take a minute or two to give a brief introduction about yourself, please.
Sure. My name is Aasim Saeed. I'm a physician, but as Vivek said, I took a kind of meandering path to entrepreneurship here. So I grew up with two physician parents, so I was probably headed to med school before I even really thought about what I wanted to do. Um, but during undergrad, I got the first inklings of kind of some other things by not majoring in sciences. I went to Rice University and did political science. And then in medical school, that persisted, that interest, because I actually did a joint degree in split time between Duke at med school and Harvard at the public policy program at the Kennedy School of Government. And then taking what I call the scenic tour through medical school, because I had to extend it to split time in Durham and Boston. I ended up doing some summer internships, and one was in the mayor's office in Houston, writing healthcare policy. And then the next was with a large consulting firm called McKinsey, which I think a lot of people are aware of. And with McKinsey, he had a seat at the table in the C-suite of large healthcare systems, and that was just too much for me to pass up. So I actually ended up skipping clinical residency, and I like to say I got my healthcare administration residency at McKinsey for about 4 years in the San Francisco office, almost exclusively working with healthcare systems, some U.S., some international, which was a really great perspective to have. I did a lot of work in the Middle East and Europe as well. And then I left McKinsey though because McKinsey is a wonderful place to build a lot of skill sets. There's a lot of McKinsey in the news for not great things these days, but I think at the end of the day, it is a place where you develop a lot of really concrete skills. But one thing that really bothered me was your product is a PowerPoint often, and they try to change this sometimes, and it ebbs and flows. But at their heart, they're a here's a PowerPoint, here's a strategy, you should go do this type company. And I really, especially one of my last engagements where we did a lot of technology stuff, I'd rather build it. And so I think that's where my first foray into startups and technology came in. And then my last most formative experience prior to launching Amenities was I spent 4 years as an executive inside of a large healthcare system. So Baylor Scott and White is the 10th largest health system approximately in the country. And I had the good fortune of leading basically a limitless funded team of innovation just to try to fix stuff. And we could talk more about that, but we had a lot of failures, but we had one or two main successes. And that's really what inspired me to say, hey, we should do this at scale with Amenities. So yeah,
Great.
that was probably a little bit longer winded than I intended, but that's a lot of background meandering through the years.
Yeah. Before we go into the companies, I always like to start by asking, like you did mention your parents were both physicians, and were they also entrepreneurs? Did they run their own practices, or was it like they were part of hospitals where they were? And also, tell us a little bit about were you an entrepreneurial kid while growing up? Like, did you have lemonade stands, or where were you at?
That's a great question. So my parents were a bit of a mix. My mom was the stellar student, I think top of her class in medical school, but she was also of a personality that preferred teaching and academics. So she was not super entrepreneurial. She was a lot more didactic. She liked having students. She liked teaching. And I can tell you, when I got into medicine, I hated every part of that. I wanted no part of long-term academia in medicine. My dad, on the other hand, was what I describe as very much a surgeon mentality. So very entrepreneurial, but also very like business minded. But at the time, foreign medical grads didn't have the pick of any residency coming over. They both did their residency in Pakistan. Sorry, their medical school in Pakistan, and came over here to Galveston, Texas at UTMB for their residency. And so my dad ended up in psychiatry. And when you say entrepreneurial, the reason I can say absolutely yes, and I was obviously picking up part of it, is he earns more as a psychiatrist than any surgeon I've ever met, and that's really about his acumen to both start a practice, leverage physician extenders, but then also frankly work multiple jobs. I mean, at like 60, he had 4 jobs. He was the chief medical director of different things. So he was highly entrepreneurial in terms of his own business. Less so, I would say, entrepreneurial, but not enterprising. I don't know if that's even the right word, but to say like his goal was never to build something like I guess what I'm trying to do, but very much a hustler and very much about, okay, what is the business of this, and how can I maximize that to grow a practice for me and my family type of thing. And so, yeah, I definitely picked up on that quite a bit. I don't know. I think I noticed it on the back end when I had to decide what kind of career in medicine I was going to have. And I obviously picked option C, which was not even on the table before, with like neither practicing. They both still wonder, when am I going back to residency at this point? And it's going to be a sad day when they actually accept that that's probably never going to happen at this point. But the second part of your question about entrepreneurialness, I'd never thought of it that way. I was, again, kind of set from day one on medicine. But at the same time, I think there are definitely points of evidence. So in college, for example, I had a friend who had started a business basically making T-shirts. And I don't think this is an original concept by any means, but basically they had syndicated it out of one college, and I think UPenn, where it started. And so locally, yes, I would take, for example, that business's credit line, and we would purchase shirts and sell them for various college events. So there were things where we were running basically a small business, and then I was also teaching quite a bit for Princeton Review and other things. But I do think that those little experiences definitely gave me a bug of like, it's funny because I talk to a lot of students and family members about this who are considering entrepreneurship. This idea of like, it can't be that hard, that naivety to go and be like, I'll just put this together. And one, I think there's a sense of naivety that I definitely have of like, it can't be that hard. And you definitely needed that, by the way, at McKinsey, because the example that they taught me, which was actually a really strong entrepreneurial skill set, was to say that I can learn anything in 6 months. There were times when I had no foundation in technology, and I would get staffed on an IT infrastructure project in healthcare. And at the beginning, I had to literally tell people, I don't know what this means. I don't know what IT architecture refers to, or infrastructure, what that word even means. And I would, by the end of it, be master of all the infrastructure of a multi-million dollar investment from the Department of Human Services in Arkansas, as well as writing a budget for a $80 million CMS innovation grant. And so that's a type of, I think, thread between the t-shirt company and McKinsey, was just like, you'll figure it out. Like, jump in the deep end with the terror and all, and just assume that at some point you'll either figure it out. And I think one thing that definitely uh, has proven true to me in this stage of my career is, even people that you kind of admire as like titans of industry and amazing kind of executives at these giant companies and big healthcare organizations, no one knows what they're doing. They're just trying to like repeat the same playbook, and the lack of kind of ingenuity and creativeness to do something different is an opportunity for everyone who is seeing things fresh. So some people, oh, it would be great to have so much experience. And I have a ton of experience in healthcare, but I talked to other startup CEOs that are in healthcare that had no healthcare experience whatsoever. And I don't know if I'm any better off. I sometimes think like I admire their naivety to get in and just, go at it, because they didn't have these assumptions about, well, that player will never do this, or there's no incentive to do this, that may be hindering me. So I love the idea for entrepreneurship of just this willingness to jump in and try something and be like, somebody did this before, I can figure it out. It has to be able to be done.
A couple of questions to this actually follow up. One is, obviously your parents both immigrated, and then they're here. There is this a mindset of survival and security, and that personally for me, I'm the first one moving out of my family and immigrated to US. So for you, was it like a mindset shift you had to practice to like, hey, let me take this leap? Because like, it's kind of like, did you have to do that mental exercise, or what did you do? How were you, or were you naive enough to like, what, I'm just gonna do what I'm gonna do?
I mean, I was definitely naive enough to do silly stuff with my career. I mean, that's just a full stop. I was like, but I think one thing that you're calling out that is really important, and I know I've lived through, is kind of the mental health, the ego side of startups. And so am very privileged in the sense that my parents came here, but they had all the challenges of immigration, biases and starting over, not being close to family or network. But it's also wonderful. America's a cosmopolitan area. I think I was talking about this with some other friends, especially kids that are exactly right my age and highest, earliest millennials, latest Gen Xers that are like late 90s, early 90s formative years. That felt like such a formative, like it's acceptable to be an immigrant in the country. And I grew up in a very rural part of Texas, but at the same time, I played high school football in Texas. It was a great time. I loved every minute of it. And so I think there was a uniqueness of our time here to where America's growing, immigrant stories are very common. It's easy to relate, and then you find those people in college, especially, and you make a ton of friends. But I think the thing that is very different from my generation versus my dad's and my mom's is they were about like doing the safest, most direct path to economic stability and viability, right? Like they've gone well beyond economic stability. They're doing really well, and they're going to amass generational wealth because of being physicians in America, which is a great opportunity. That's just never been my goal. And part of that is the privilege of they did it already. I have security, assuming that I don't, my dad and I butt heads a lot, but at some point, assuming I don't piss him off too much, his security and his completion, it's one thing that we see very differently, but I acknowledge that. It's because, again, they were solving for stability in a new land and all of this kind of things that were set against them. Whereas I'm very conscious of, and this is maybe my public policy bent, is like, okay, I have so much privilege. I got to do something to fix healthcare, to help the country, to do. I have like an obligation, a moral obligation to do as many risky things as I can because I can. And I think I'm maybe unique in an entrepreneur that I don't believe in this like I bootstrapped it, I got my own like I've had so much help and so much luck and so much privilege along this way that every part of it I can see clearly where the advantage came in here or there. So for example, my first startup when I left McKinsey, I was in fintech, which was a really clunky thing for a doctor to have to answer why you're in fintech constantly. And then my colleagues at the time, my contemporaries from classmates, were either struggling public servants from the public policy program, or they were residents making like 40 grand a year working 80 hours a week. So nobody had any disposable income. I raised some money with some friends and family, but it was a modest amount. Fast forward to when I launched Amenities, and two of my very close friends, one had recently IPO'd, and the other one was running a $250 million raised on a diagnostic startup. Mine, and then it was also COVID. I didn't have to be in New York or San Francisco. I could get 100 meetings with VCs, and I had a network that could introduce me. And an introduction, as you know, in this industry is very helpful. And so that's not to say that I didn't bring some characteristics of expertise and background to the table that was compelling. And I like to think I know what I'm doing. But at the same time, like I very much acknowledge the luck of the timing of those two different ones because I went through them back to back and I was the same person in both of them. And so, like, yes, I had some more experience. Yes, I was aligned to healthcare, which I have much more credibility in. But at the same time, like it was the introductions, it was post COVID, it was I can do everything over Zoom and still live in Texas without having to move to San Francisco, New York. There's all these things that I'm very grateful for that I acknowledge. And so, but I see those and say, if you just look at the game of entrepreneurship, most people, I mean, you hear of obviously these massive overnight successes, but most people have to take a couple of shots. And nobody wants to hear that as an investor, like, oh, this may be the one or two that I missed, but as an entrepreneur, you need to get up after every knockdown and then go at it again because you've kind of made this bet. Like, if you stop after one or two knockdowns, and then the third one would have been the one where you made it work because of all the skills and luck involved. Again, there's a lot of luck, but that's a good thing. That means you have a lot of. If you were unlucky the first two, I was made some stupid mistakes in the first one, but it's definitely unlucky on one or two things. And the fact that that could work in my favor just statistically, then you got to keep at it. And like I said, it takes one or two of these. And then I think one thing that I've observed is once you have one success, though, success begats success. Now, all of a sudden, fundraising is easier. Your network, you're viewed as a winner. Other people come in on second and third rounds. Things are for right, wrong, or indifferent. People, I always looked at this. It's the same reason that like head coaches in the NBA and NFL will get fired for literally not doing their job well enough, but they're a known quantity. They have enough experience. And they get hired into a new head coaching role. And there's a lot of reasons why it's hard to coach in the NFL and the NBA. But I'm just saying, like, just think about that. Like, instead of betting on somebody new, the mentality is, hey, that person just got fired from that thing. We'd rather hire the known quantity. We know they know how to do the job. Even if they didn't do it that well or successfully, we know that they're going to be the preferred one. And that's how conservative the world is. So it's not terribly surprising that, like, when you keep at it in entrepreneurship, that you speak the talk, you have some credibility, even if they weren't knockout successes, that you need to keep at it. And the thing that I started this rant by saying was ego. I think the hardest thing for me to have learned painfully, and is a really great lesson I try to take it, is that, especially when you come from a pedigree of like Rice, Duke, Harvard, McKinsey, going out and basically asking everyone for money, and then at the time when I was doing fintech was like literally asking my friends if I could do their taxes, is an odd thing to have to do and to explain to people. But I'll be damned if I was going to let my ego get in the way of any of this stuff. And so anybody who's not willing to do everything like that and ask your friends for help, and ask to do whatever product that they're selling or get feedback and take it internally, is never going to cut it. Like, the large egos in entrepreneurship are, I think, some of the worst things you could possibly have. Now, it takes some time. And by the way, people often ask me, like, oh, do you need a chief medical officer? I'm like, first of all, no, I'm a doc. And the medicine part of what we're doing is, frankly, the easiest part. And absolutely not, because I don't want somebody to sit around and think because they're an MD. This is a gross generalization of MDs, but this is an
Yeah.
example of what I'm saying. You can't. Oh, actually, let me say it another way that doesn't berate MDs, because it's not specific to MDs. The idea is that, like, you, and I've worked with a lot of executives, both McKinsey and during my time at Baylor Scott and White. Executives make the worst startup people. Anytime I see, like, oh, this executive from this, health system or this health plan is going to go start a company, I'm like, good luck to them, because if you aren't able to do everything on the ground yourself, the expectation of being an executive as a startup, one, you have to raise like 20 to 40 million dollars. The expectations of growing into that as a revenue, they're just made up. They're just complete fabrication of any sort of real startup dynamics. And, God bless anybody that gets that privilege of doing that, but, like, that's not a real startup. That's not a hustle. That's not anything. If you have an admin, if you have an EA or an administrative assistant when you do a startup, you are not a startup, in my opinion. Like, that's just garbage nonsense, I think. And so that level of ego, whether it's executives, physicians, whatever. Now, there are wonderful executives who are hustlers. There are wonderful physicians who are hustlers. But if you're expecting any of that as you come in, not being able to make your own PowerPoints, not being able to not just design strategy, but do the operations, the implementation, you are not useful to a startup. Full stop.
Great point, mates. There are a couple of call outs here. I want to give one shout out to your parents to making you feel that secure and that you were ready to go out in the world. So very less parents get the credit. We want to just make sure,
Yeah,
Tim's
they deserve
parents
a lot of
get a good job done. And the second thing is, I've spent my time in Germany, and there is a untold secret in German startup world. The way German machine or startup machinery works is they actually prefer people coming from consulting to founder route, and there's a reason for that. German society is a little bit, I would say, like, still very much conservative when taking to risk, not like America. And so they feel that comfort that people coming with, and again, it's an engineering brain, so they prefer people who come with structure, who knows how to operationalize things, and they value those things a lot more. So a lot of my friends who I know, they are like, hey, McKinsey's, and then after BCG and McKinsey, they are like, hey, now I'm fine, now I'm starting a company. It was just incredible to see, just like they don't get that much value here in the US per se. They get a lot of
Yeah,
flack here.
it's mixed. I would say that again, I like to be pretty even handed about pros and cons. I think there's an amazing skill set of McKinsey. Their selection process selects for people that are never gonna not work hard enough for something. So that part, like, I mean, getting into McKinsey was harder than getting into med school, and that's the top 5 med school at the time, right? So there are those amazing things. The one thing I would say that, I suspect, and I'm making, again, gross generalizations about Germany and other entrepreneurial environments rather than the US, is what I always found lacking, and I criticize myself for this, is risk tolerance and creativity. I think consulting conforms you to structure often, and in a lot of mid-sized kind of startups and stuff, that's a good thing. Like, you get the basics of, how to like, I don't have a CFO. I don't need a CFO. I know how to do everything on P&Ls and management of my financial models and other things. Like I would never need to pay someone for that. But at the same time, this level of creativity of not working in a structured environment and or risk taking, trying things that sound insane. Because I think especially a lot of times consultants will come out and be like, I saw this inefficiency between these two large players and I want to do automation of bots. That's great. That's not a unicorn though. And I'm not saying everybody has to go for a unicorn, but I'm saying again, for as many really good consultants turned entrepreneurs there are, I think there are many consultants that are too structured in their thinking and not aggressive enough or not creative enough to try different things. So I think it comes down to the individual. The thing that you guarantee with McKinsey is, again, the horsepower and the baseline, what's called the consulting toolkit. BCG the same, Bain, etc. Now, again, what I would then want to test for is, okay, great. Do they have ego about this? Can they hustle? Can they, when asked, be creative about creating either new capabilities or why is the world this way and what can we do about it? Because again, suggesting to Fortune 500 companies 3 new initiatives they should try is very different than saying we're going to now go try to put some of those Fortune 500 businesses out of business, right? Like that's a very disruptive mindset. And sometimes you're a little bit mired in the, well, I've sat with those executives, they would never do this or that or type of thing. So again, I'm generalizing, but it comes down to more of a, and by the way, I see that as a big difference in the American entrepreneurial environment versus both European and anywhere else, is that like we still win on creativity. Like there's so many things created here that just cannot be created elsewhere unless they are purely copied from our creative markets. Like everything related to social media would have been thought of as basically like stupid from any other environment, right? If you're an
Yeah.
engineer or just like little nuances, like why is, I mean, again, I'm past this. I can't even fathom this because I'm too old now. It's like what makes TikTok so much different and better than YouTube Shorts? And every younger generation would slap me in the face for saying something so ridiculous, right? But it's those types of things that America's so good at, the uniqueness of the design centricity, the creativity required to do some things that we never thought we needed. Now, obviously, social media has a lot of downsides and that hasn't worked out great for the world. But at the same time, it's just, I always like to appreciate that America gives you this craziness of ideas that some of which strike and are so interesting and cool that just wouldn't even be acceptably thought of in other places where they do have an engineering mindset. Because it's like, what problem did TikTok solve? And if you had to say that in a PowerPoint before it was TikTok, you'd probably be like, I don't know, that like other apps aren't cool enough. I don't even know what you would say. Like, what problem did it solve? And yet, how mired are we in that kind of like you have to have a problem that it solves? And yet, some of the biggest companies in the world, like, what problem did they solve? They're just sticky. They're kind of amazing new little things, and they had a whim, and it worked out. I mean, when Instagram was created versus Facebook, like again, any I think rational person would have been like, Facebook can do what Instagram. You can post pictures on Facebook. That's a feature of this company. Why is that a whole different thing? But there's a beauty in its simplicity and what its use cases for and how they built their community differently. Anyway, I just observations to say that like I don't underemphasize creativity and soft skills more than engineering by any means.
Yeah, I mean, look, my personal experience, I have lived and worked on 3 different continents, very different: Asia, Germany, and in the US. And I'm pretty much aligned with what you're saying. This is how I felt. This is how my experiences felt. There's a different kind of, like there's no limit, kind of. That's how I feel in the US. Like you just
Yeah.
go, like like I don't feel any, like there is no ceiling. Like that's kind of how I feel. So that's kind of what is great about America. All right, so moving ahead and talking about your current company. So what was the moment that, or insight that led to the creation of Amenities Health? And also tell us a little bit what specific problems it solves today, and how do
Sure.
you approach differently than anything, if at all it exists?
Yeah. So I really built amenities as a thesis to the biggest problem that I encountered, which is how do you improve something in healthcare? I mean, as a healthcare industry veteran for about 10 years, then, from consult medicine to public policy, studying healthcare policy, then to McKinsey, and then as an executive, some things seem just like wholly intractable. Like, and these are my judgment calls, but like, I don't know how to solve the cost of healthcare because it's a feature, not a bug. Everyone's getting rich, and there's not really an incentive to slow it down. There's a lot of lip service, like, oh, we have to stop bankrupting people. But everyone who's like, oh, but you're not going to affect my pay, you're not going to affect my job. So, like, nobody's willing to fire themselves. No, we're not going to fix cost. And part of that is my somewhat pessimistic view that we have a healthcare industrial complex, just like the military industrial. Like, it's just a big business now. It's just an industry where everyone goes, oh, healthcare, yeah, that needs our money. Like, there's no, like, there's this, unfortunately, forgiveness for bad business in this industry because it's healthcare, it's special. We don't do that with education. Education is hugely important, but we're like, oh, let's see how little we can pay teachers just to really just make them just not quit. Okay. We don't do that with docs, right? We're like, oh crap, how much more do we got to pay them? And there's a lot of dynamics and why. But so I don't know how to fix cost. Quality doesn't mean anything in this entire industry. Like, the words quality to a doctor mean 30-day readmission, rate of revision for ACL repair. For a hospital, sorry, it is 30-day readmission. It's what am I going to get penalized for? It's hemoglobin A1C rates. For a carrier, it's like, okay, who's a good doctor? Who should we exclude from a network? And they're saying cost versus quality, right? To a patient, it is like, how bad was parking? Could I book my own appointment? How rude was the office staff when I called in or not? Or how long did I have to wait on hold? How long was I in the waiting room? So we're all saying something different when we mean the word we mean something different when we're saying the word quality. It's just completely different. And no one seems to care to want to fix that. Because the problem is, if we all aligned and say, here's something that should be obvious, like, how did your surgery go? Seems like a pretty obvious, like, quality metric, but I've never met a doc who wanted to acknowledge a metric that they didn't look amazing on already. And so the fact that this industry won't self-govern, quality is meaningless to me. Anybody who's like, oh, but it's proven that hospitals that are owned by physician are better quality, which is something that I had a friend say to me once. And I was like, oh yeah, tell me what quality they're measuring for that. Oh, well, I don't know. I just read the article headline and it sounds intuitive. Doctors should be in charge of medicine. Like, there's absolutely nothing. Have you ever met a doctor agree on a quality metric that they weren't already good at? It's like, well, no, of course not. That's silly. So again, it takes 3 seconds to break down any argument of quality to completely bias sentiment, pushing what you want to say that you are already good at, which is what I've seen people do in value-based care. Every executive's like, oh, well, we're only going to pick the bundle payments that we already win at, and then we're going to can all the rest. I mean, this is why downside risk is nowhere to be found in most places other than like Medicare Advantage, where it's being forced by the government, right? So, okay, so that I'm complaining now. I'm just complaining. Sorry. Those are the two things I don't know how to fix. I think we can fix experience. I think that is something that the rising tide will rise all ships. And the problem with experience, the aha, why I built amenities, was health systems. I think a couple of facts that hopefully are obvious how they string together to give me the thesis of amenities. Health systems will deliver the majority of care in this country, just like large grocery chains will be where most food comes from. There's always going to be restaurants and other things, but most people will buy most of their food from a large regional grocery store. Perfect analogy for healthcare. You might have an independent doctor, you might use Teladoc one day. You're going to get the majority of the care that you receive in this country from UPMC because you live in Pittsburgh or Highmark or Allegheny or Wellspan, right? Like, you will, because that's who owns hospitals, and the hospital will be the majority of the cost of your care, maybe not your total interactions. Number two statement that should be obvious is currently health systems have zero competition based on experience. If you ever see what they're advertising, they're just like, our docs are the best. New US News Week puts us as the best GI something or another. Just silly stuff that, again, as my first point when I ranted about quality, is meaningless to patients. Because I was like, I don't know what that means. US News, Wellspan, I can guarantee you 100%, I could bet $1,000 on it today, that Wellspan, UPMC, and Allegheny all have some US News ranking on some billboard somewhere. And again, are you as a patient supposed to stop, read that on the billboard as you're driving into work and be like, you know what, GI, that's what I have a problem. I'll go to Wellspan because they won the GI one. But UPMC won the best hospital in Pennsylvania award. It's meaningless, right? Like, it's not decipherable. So they're all out there just being like, our doctors are the best, our doctor's the best, and no one can actually verify any of that. By the way, it is verifiable. It's just that the payers and companies like Clarify, you have to do a lot of intense data studies. And again, nobody's publishing that because heaven forbid you look bad on one thing if you want to look good on the other. It's just silly. I mean, Baylor Scott and White, I had no idea. We had two of the best performing heart hospitals south of Cleveland Clinic, and nobody knew it because we had data to prove it. But if we showed that, then it showed how bad we were on five other things. And it was like, oh, well, we're never going to, heaven forbid we ever show the patient this information. So they don't compete on experience. They don't compete on anything besides how big they are and how much market power they can command. And buying, the only other thing that was assumed for a while, it's starting to change now, is if we buy up a bunch of medical groups, we bought your doctor, you're going to come to us no matter what because you're sticking with your doctor. And that was a big assumption for the most of the 90s, 2000s, and then 2010s. That game has kind of played its course. There's not too many more practices to be bought. And I hope they do, if the FTC kind of nullifies the non-competes, then these doctors aren't going to stick around because they don't want to. They're just in a non-compete. They don't want to move their kids out of high school from that area, right? So, okay, that was the second thing. They don't compete on experience. And then the last assumption is and the reason they don't is they don't see any financial benefit to it. So if they invest in something that is a much better experience, it's so hard to advertise it and to make sure that you stick with them. So like if they make sure, hey, we have a massive initiative like Baylor did with a better app, or we have, we made sure that wait times in waiting rooms are down to 5 minutes or less. We worked on all this rooming. It doesn't change the market a ton because that doesn't guarantee that you're going to get your surgery there, which is actually what finances like 90% of healthcare is surgeries, inpatients, large procedures, stuff like that. And so these things are disconnected in your overall experience to just where did you pick the surgery? And so finally, that's where my thesis comes in, which is what amenities does, which is there is no loyalty in healthcare. We've shown this repeatedly. Like, even if you told me I love UPMC, I would bet that 50% of people who say they love UPMC are splitting their time at Allegheny, at WellSpan, and other local systems. Because that's the problem, is everyone's splitting and nobody actually knows, because you only know who came to your system. You don't have a really great sense of individual patients. When we ask patients, who are you loyal to and where have you been? It's unbelievable to see how much everyone's cheating on everyone. And so that's what we're saying is, okay, now imagine if they could move loyalty, that would be worth billions. At Baylor Scott and White, if you could move 10% of the market from your competitors to you, that would be worth over $1 billion in new revenues. And so Amenity's thesis is every other industry has kind of figured out subscription memberships, long-term things that the customer has selected because you can deliver them obscene amount of value for that little bit of payment, whether that's Costco, whether that's Amazon Prime, whether that's Spotify. People are willing to be loyal to things and sign up with their own credit card for that loyalty if you do something better for them. And so Amenities is that. Amenities is here to help health systems create a better experience and tie that to concrete financial returns with direct-to-consumer and direct-to-employer memberships. So we design, build, launch, and manage those direct-to-consumer memberships, all white-labeled for the health system. And part of that learning or aha was when One Medical came to town in Texas. And for folks that aren't familiar, One Medical is now owned by Amazon, but previously was this concierge primary care network around the country, single owned, so very standardized, good technology, meaning they built their own EMR. They had a decent patient-facing tool, but frankly, nothing that Epic can't do already, or even Cerner or others. But what they really were was a giant, and this sounds horrible, like kind of a Ponzi scheme in the sense that like they were never profitable. They were losing money constantly. They've never literally been profitable a day in their life. They were purchased for $4 billion and they were never profitable. So even at several $100 million raised, the idea was, hey, if patients will pay more for concierge experience. The problem was, one, that wasn't enough to cover the bills. Then they're like, oh crap, who do we sell this to? We need to go to employers and get a lot more volume. So they started selling that. Still not enough, still not profitable. They're like, crap, we have all these patients. What can we do with them? Who else would pay us? Health systems, those are a bunch of suckers. We would get them to pay us to be their partner. And so they come into a market like Dallas or Fort Worth and they say, hey, THR, hey, Baylor Scott and White, you're going to pay us because if not, we're going to take all of our 8,000 PwC employee members and we're going to take them across the street and then you're going to look bad. And so they, out of fear and loathing, they just get one health system sign up and everyone loses money. One Medical loses money. The health system's paying for a bunch of referrals that they don't really get. They're not paying for referrals, but they're paying for referrals. And they never actually get any of them because that's not how their patients use them. So if you purchase a One Medical purchase membership yourself, you are likely to use that as your primary care. Most people don't. Most people now, the employer model grew a ton, in which case it's just urgent care in the city. And so you're not going to use it for referrals for downstream surgeries or specialties anyway. And that's unfortunately what every health system realized. And so, and then here's the worst part is One Medical would come into Dallas and say, hey, your brand that everyone knows, Baylor Scott and White and THR, that's garbage. Use ours. Let's introduce One Medical to this community. And by the way, you pay us because you're a bunch of suckers. And so that was the part where I was just like, oh my God, memberships is the right model, but the brand is the best thing that health systems have going for them. As much as I just dogged on all the lack of competition and everyone's cheating on everyone, think about it this way, and this is why I approve, but I'm not down on the brand. In fact, I think to some argument is health systems are just one giant marketing company. Like they own all these disparate businesses. They own hospitals, they own outpatient practices, they own sometimes pharmacies and rehab centers. The only thing connecting those is a brand that has value, right? And the reason that brand is undeniably valuable is if you are in Palo Alto and you have Dr. A, who's an independent doctor, and you have Dr. B, who works at Stanford, who's the better doctor? You're just like, I don't know, the Stanford one, because it says Stanford on his name. That's it. That's the power of the brand. That's everything. It's so valuable. The fact that One Medical would be like, discard that. That's so stupid, and be introduced One Medical, which is meaningless to everyone in Dallas. That was silly. And so we are amenities by name because we are white labeled. We leverage the brand, and we're just trying to fix their experience for them on the things that they are really bad at. And that includes direct to consumer memberships that are attacking the worst parts of the patient experience, which health systems, I think, unfortunately just assume, oh, it's access. They can't see our doctors. Our doctors are so amazing and they can't see them fast enough. That's clearly the top problem. The problem is price. The biggest problem is price and the cost and the lack of price transparency and all this other stuff. And health systems have never been incentivized to invest in that. Every time we do this, no surprise bill guarantee and protection, error protections, transparent cash pay pricing, satisfaction guarantees are two of the top 5 things that patients want. And they're willing to pay for them. And they're willing to give you loyalty for those features. Think of it as like Apple Care for health systems. But there are then other packages like an access package where they get 24/7 virtual encounters, but that's not enough. That's ubiquitous. Anybody can buy that anywhere. We have a lot of health system partners who are like, we want to go to the market with 24/7 virtual urgent care. I'm like, that's available everywhere. Why would anyone pay you a membership for that? I could download an app today and get to an appointment in 5 minutes with Amazon, literally with Amazon. Why would I pay you $20, $30 a month for that? Your brand ain't that good. And so you have to pair it with something they can't get elsewhere, which is same day specialist consults or, really high end care and services, things like, hour long doctor's appointments, unlimited messaging, things that they can't get. And unfortunately, I think, again, health systems are overeager on how powerful their brand is. Like, we'll just put out a text messaging solution and charge $200 a year and they'll pay us. And I'm like, that's never going to happen. You have to market test these things. And so, you know this because you're a hustler on the marketing side too. We're kind of like trying to figure out what is the marketing thing that will build a better experience for them that will earn loyalty. And we are probably not the best marketers, but we know health systems, we know Epic, we know all the intricacies of this industry to actually get them dragging, kicking, and streaming along this line. And that's the fun part. That's what amenities is. That's what it does. That was the aha moment. Man, I'm giving you really long-winded answers.
So to unpack this, this is the white label solution. This is a software, or is it services part to the solution, or is it just a software?
Software and services. We will
Okay,
do
so
everything,
you
but we also find the partners to do the things that are already available in the market.
right, like also because you're also trying to build value added membership related features for patients experience to enhance that, so you work with each client based on that, right? Like you go
Yeah.
into a little
Yeah.
deeper understanding. Okay,
We do the
that makes
localized
sense.
research, we package and we say, hey, here's the package of things that'll work in your market. And then we design and build those. Sometimes, well, our tech aggregating all of them, but leveraging partners for no surprise bill and error protection is a company called Good Bill, which is a fantastic company that already does that. We don't have to build that infrastructure. We just partner with them and put it inside the
Yeah,
membership.
yeah, I love this idea of a lot in a way because it's one of the most obvious things to solve, let's say, for health systems. And it is the most ignored thing because, like how you're saying, that the way they think about their business is like, people will come, right? Like that's what it is.
People
We
got
got providers, we got, that's how they think. But they, what they really don't understand is like the equation of retention and loyalty and maybe even lifetime value that you are probably showing them,
there's
and they probably never saw it.
there's not a health system in the country that knows their lifetime value of a patient. It took me personally at Baylor 18 months to get 1 year revenues, 1 year contribution margins. There's 98% of CFOs in the country have no concept of contribution margin because that's not how they look at it. That was, taught to me at McKinsey. And so, yeah, it's not a very sophisticated retail commerce type business because again, I think they are, brand organizations trying to. I think of them more like holding companies. We're like, we need to hold these hospitals, but let the hospital operators run this. We need to hold these clinics. We need to hold these pharmacies, and we need to decide what's in the portfolio. But how to actually make these things work together or stitch together a good experience for that brand is not their sweet spot. Let's just say.
And I will tell you, like a few months ago when I was going establishing my business and I was looking for health insurance here in Pittsburgh, and one of the key things for me was who makes my life easier as in patient experience. And I literally was, for me, the winner was UPMC's experience, because I was like, I'm not going to Blue Cross and all associations. Like I,
Yeah.
this is doesn't work for me, and this is UPMC. Look at their app and look at their check-in experience, like everything that makes me feel like, oh, that
At
was
least they're
like,
trying. And by the way,
yeah.
UPMC. So I operated the third largest innovation shop behind UPMC in Providence in the Pacific Northwest. But if you like that app, that is about 100 miles behind my BSW Health in Dallas, Texas, because we crushed it. That the one thing that we were the best at, and Amenities now does for other health systems, is we build this digital front door mobile experience because it's just baseline, like just makes it better, right? So we're working with a couple of health systems to do that, but I really spend my time focused on and really trying to get health systems to elevate the experience with memberships. So they don't have a membership there yet. I wish we could work with UPMC to do that. They have a health plan too, and they're. Did you? By the way, did
Yeah.
you get the health plan as well?
Yes. So the whole thing was like health plan, and then what gets me coverage, and then
Yeah,
experience to that. So,
yeah,
and they have two apps separate, but they still connect with each other. So that's also nice.
that's good.
But yeah, to the point of like, it's a. Do you think like in this country we are moving towards slightly like experience is so big, and I give this example by looking at the patient side, and with the rise of preventative care that's happening, that people are ready to pay money to private practices on subscriptions, and that's totally starts from experience and the time that I'm getting from people. And
Yeah,
that's happening because at hospitals you end up sick care, right? Like when you have condition, you really go there. But now we also want preventative care, and we don't want to deal with hospitals, we don't want to deal with the systems. The
I think
experience sucks. What do you think
I
about
think
that?
there's. I'm a believer in some things and very much a skeptic of some things that a lot of people are pushing, like the move to value based care, the move to preventative care. Unfortunately, I just don't think any of the incentives are aligned. Like in value based care, it's far easier to get the patient's records and upcode them than it is to keep them out of the hospital and to do the hard things. And unfortunately, that incentive has just not been figured out. I don't think. I think consumerism, for all its merits, and this is a company who's built on consumerism, lives in these merits, right? I don't think 90% of executives believe that matters at all because they've been told that for the last 10 years, the last 20 years, that consumerism is going to change your market. And they're like, okay, I'm going to go take this doctor out to steak and they're going to bring me $2 million worth of business this next year. Like that's, I mean, I was on stay. I get to ask a large nonprofit, or sorry, large for-profit health system CEO at a conference. I got up and asked him, "What do you think about consumerism, digital health, fact or fiction?" And he was just like, "No, it's silly." Like, and that's how for-profits believe it is. It's just like on the margins, it's cute. We run hospitals and we have partnerships with doctors, and that's the strategy, and it's worked really well. And to their credit, he's not wrong. Now, I think there's two things that could seismically change that. One is what we're betting on, which is I can work with a health system and create such a differentiated experience that once I demonstrate, it isn't consumerism of like suck a little bit less. It's like go above and beyond and transform your industry like Amazon Prime did. So before Prime, I use this example constantly, so it's a little bit tired if you've heard it from me before. But and I wrote about this in Becker's. There's a big Becker's piece about this. Amazon Prime didn't just win for Amazon; it shifted the mentality of e-commerce Before Amazon Prime, the two worst things about e-commerce was, one, what if I don't like it? Now I'm gonna have to pay to ship it back, right? Now the returns. And then two, or what if it doesn't fit? What if I don't like it? Whatever, because I can't touch it, feel it like I can at Walmart, right? And then the second one was, I want it now. I want it tomorrow. I want it, like, I don't want to wait 2 weeks for this thing to show up. May not even want it then. So the instant gratification. So 2 day shipping, 1 day shipping, free returns transformed the industry because they attacked the things that were the barrier to unlocking e-commerce value. So when I say, like, we want to shift we want to say, hey, you think you have loyalty right now, you don't. We can prove that to you. But two, imagine how many patients are staying at home because they're worried about going to the doctor, then the doctor saying they need an x-ray, then having to pay for that x-ray, then having to wait for that x-ray, and oh my god, what if that x-ray says something really bad? So if you start addressing their fears of why they're not even in the industry, I think there's 25% more volume out there. And we have these numbers, by the way. Everyone say, if you ask patients how many of you have avoided care in the last year, a third of them will say yes today. And it's even higher in lower incomes and less desirable insurance markets, right? And that's crazy. So that means that as much as this industry complains about its finances right now, there are a third of unserved patients. And that's because they're just like, whoa, it's too expensive. I can't do it. So we're hoping that we can unlock a dominant winner. That's one thing. And then the second thing that I'm starting to be the canary in the coal mine about is GLP-1s are going to shift this market. I think right now we're like, oh, it's no big deal. You don't see Wall Street saying that. They're like, we got to get out of fast food chains. We got to get out of like candy and sugar businesses, because if you fundamentally change literally the appetite of Americans, everything will be affected. And in healthcare, we saw this in 1 year. Bariatric service lines, so gastric bypass, all of these things that, stomach stapling, the sleeve, the loop, they took a hit last year of 30%. So
Wow.
30% of the volume shifted from what was admittedly like a weight loss service line to medication management, right, with GLP-1s. But, and this is what health systems aren't, I think, accounting for, is 90% of cardiovascular is weight related. I mean, that's a number I'm making up, but like, think about it, like high cholesterol, obesity, hypertension. These are all like diet related morbidities. And then even orthopedics, joint replacement, which is one of the most common major surgeries for orthopedics, is also weight related. If those, by the way, those are literally two of the top three most profitable service lines that account for 20 to 50% collectively of a hospital's profitability. And if those go away, or if they take a significant dent, it won't be consumerism that crushed them. It'll be all of a sudden that they were scraps at the table for inpatient ones. And then I think consumerism is going to be a lever to say, crap, how do we get those last third of patients in the health system that weren't in there before? So I think there are waves of things coming. It's not consumerism. I think, again, we cried wolf for the last 20 years trying to get health system executives to care about consumerism. And I don't think it's that. I think it's the dominant winner who bet on consumerism hard and crushed their market. And then they'll all be like, oh, yeah, we meant it this whole time. Now we'll do it. Or it'll be some disaster scenario, which COVID already was, but now is going to be something else like GLP-1s.
It will be a, I guess, another full episode on that. But I was speaking with someone who's actually running a telemed platform because there's so much demand. It's like, I just need to create a easiest way for people to get GLP-1s. And this is it was actually the previous episode that we released. But it's exactly what he explained, was like, it's changing behaviors also, because people were waiting for weight loss to work to change the behavior. It took 6 months, 9 months. But now with GLPs, when the behavior changes in 30 days or 45 days, then you're almost like, oh, so there's an incentive to change behavior now. Let me fix my eating habits. Let me fix
Yeah,
exercising. And that's what you're saying. It's going to change everything
it's
in
going to change
like how it's going
everything.
to work.
And think about it right
Yeah.
now. What's the biggest barrier to GLP-1s right now is the cost, right? They are
Yep.
10 years into their 20-year patent. In 10 more years, they're going to be 25 cents. Not exactly, but like, that's like, yeah, we have that's what I'm saying. Like, I wish that was like 5 years from now, because again, it would make health systems change their entire thinking. Because the reality is, I mean, I don't love this about America, which is like, we subsidize corn and we pay all the fast food places to get us nice and fat, and then we got to pay pharma to make us skinny again. So it's not wonderful, but it's better
Yeah.
than having obesity run amok, right? So I think it's still going to be on the upside better, and nothing in public health has worked. Literally, there was a great podcast Peter Attia did with this public health expert, and it was just like, look, if we're being very real, this whole nutrition labels on foods and education and nothing has worked. Nothing has dented obesity epidemic, but GLP-1s have, and they are incredibly efficacious. Now we don't know. Now we know them in morbid obesity, and we know them in diabetes. We don't know the long-term effects just in like moderate weight loss, but at the same time, and the risk profile might be a little bit higher, but at the same time, it's America. They're going to get their hands on them. Like
Yeah.
this is coming, and the reality is, it's going to be good for a lot of people, but it's not going to be good for hospitals in terms of their economics, and they don't seem to like they're aware of it, but they're not doing anything differently. And sorry, the last one is health systems. I think this is a new trend that we're very much a part of, and we hope we can take advantage of, which is health systems have been so bad at really making good finances. Like most health systems are -1 to 1% margin. Sometimes they're like, oh, if we get to 5, then we're not doing our job as a nonprofit, which is not this identity crisis of being bad at business. It feels like a weird thing that healthcare goes through only. But I think they are all looking for new, diverse business revenue generating opportunities. And again, we think we are a mainstay one of that. I mean, I've heard really kind of nonsense things. Health systems like, we're going to become wellness companies. No, you're not. Like, there is nobody who's like, I would love to go to UPMC to really understand meditation. Like, it's not brand consistent, and they think it is. And we never had that permission. It is sick care now. Again, protecting me from financial ruin from a hospital bill is super on brand for these health systems. So we want to help them build a business that is on brand. Not saying you can't do something in wellness or something upstream, but that is not your brand. This idea that like I really care what Mayo Clinic thinks about avocado toast is just silly to me.
Yeah, that's funny. What are the biggest challenges at the moment, especially as a CEO for you? What's keeping
We
you up at night?
The biggest thing is, so we've done really well in terms of the software works. We have 2 marquee clients that are launched. We have very unique capabilities. Epic is something that we are deeply integrated with, which makes us very unique. I think there's a lot of headwinds for technology in healthcare, but I think the biggest headwind for anybody, not just technologists in healthcare is just so slow to adopt. And so we are in these long sales cycles. We are in these whims of, not whims, but like, oh, we bought a hospital, everything stops for 2 years. And there's going to be a lot more M&A. And I mean, Tenet is divesting all of that. That affected one of our clients. They literally just paused everything we were doing because they bought 4 hospitals. They're going to roll out Epic. So that really challenges the ability to do anything often. And so I think that's a feature, not a bug. We need to get over it. We need to do better. But that's what keeps me up at night is the timing of like getting this live with health systems. They're just notoriously very slow moving machines, and in general, that's good. You don't want doctors on a whim changing your
Yeah,
chemotherapy things just because they read an article that something new and cool was out. So conservatism is built in. I always say that. I think I wrote an article about this once, but like the things you love about your doctor are the things you hate about, are why healthcare sucks. Like they are group thinkers. They want a society of orthopedics to bless a golden standard of treatment. They don't want to try new things. Again, I'm generalizing, but these are, I think, foundationally inherent qualities that make them a good doctor, but make them bad at like adopting new technology. We want doctors to be Ivy League grads and highly prestigious and maybe even egotistical when there are surgeons, right? But that is like every doctor does their own thing. I always say, like, imagine if Southwest Airlines, every individual pilot could decide whether or not their passengers book their flight online or not. And that's scheduling in America. Every doctor gets to decide whether or not they participate in this thing called the web, the internet. I mean, it's amazing. They're like, no, I don't want the internet. My patients are going to call, and that's insane. And then the last
yeah,
one is that they're just their group. I mentioned the group mentality, but like the downside is decision making happens in batches. Everyone, we used to joke at Baylor, like the janitor has a veto. everything has everybody, every individual party involved has a veto, and it takes a champion who is going to go put their career on the line to almost do anything new. And that's because it's not super competitive. Some of these organizations are so highly insulated from the outside world that they, like I said, there are sick people. There's people going to show up. They're not wrong. They're just, they could do better, right? And so that makes them so protected that inside they don't want to make mistakes, because that's how you get fired, is making mistakes. And so it's very risk averse.
Got it. And where are you with your fundraising? Are you currently fundraising, and what's your current traction looks like? If you want to shed some light on that.
Sure. So we raised just under $10 million in 2 rounds. We have over half of that in the bank. So we're not actively fundraising. We are live with multiple clients on Epic. Like I said, I think our app with Memorial Care and with Mercy are very unique. Unlike most digital front doors, we incorporate 98% of Epic. We log in, it registers into Epic. That's already very unique. We have our first Athena customer going live next month, which is very exciting. We have more, and we are in the process of actually signing our first membership client. And so we're, I think, getting there with proving the whole spectrum of like reduce the friction, make the tools easier. Like the, again, the UPMC app you love, you would love the apps that we built, because that's best in class. Baylor, Scott and White, UPMC, Providence, but now we've elevated health systems like Memorial Care and Mercy into that same category, I think. And then secondarily, we are starting these conversations about co-building these membership experiences with these health systems, and that's really the exciting future that we're really trying to push.
So, looking ahead, the future, what's the long term vision? Where are you heading? Because you did touch a little bit about memberships and as a separate offering. How are you thinking about it as a company? What's the future?
I think memberships is the big bet, because at the end of the day, there's technology in healthcare for everything I mentioned. Even once it starts working, which again, I think we've demonstrated, we have very unique things where people struggle with integration with Epic, and we've demonstrated you can download the apps, you can experience that yourself. It's still going to be slow moving. It's just a, oh well, we got to think about, we got to put a committee together to say, are we going to move off of my chart, or are we going to build our own app, or are we going to buy something? So those things are slow. I think for us, that's a good business. We're excited. I think we have a very differentiated product. But memberships is an opportunity to shift the dynamics of this industry. So I'll be damned if I don't take big bets. Back to the original theme, like that was the whole point of this, is take big bets. And I know the frequency of them working out and all the things, the luck that has to align for them to work out. But I will get right back up and take another big bet right after that, because that's the odds. I'm a horrible gambler, but like I gamble with my career really well. I think I, like in poker, I'm just like, no, these chips, they're actual dollars. I can't possibly spend them. But with my career, I'm like, yeah, just throw, throw being a doctor out of the window. Let's go start a fintech company. Throw McKinsey out of the window. Let's go, be an entrepreneur. So, yeah, I will roll the dice with my career constantly.
Wow, great. All right. Well, this has been great. I end up the show with one last question. It's kind of like a fun question that I ask. So, tell us about a personal thing that no one in your professional circles knows about you, but this is your chance to share it. Could be anything that you feel is appropriate, but could be hobby, could be something that you do, or whatever you want to share. This is your chance.
I don't know if this is a weird thing to say is a good thing, or a terribly bad thing, but it's not super meaningful, but it's fun. I grew up cutting my own hair often, and now I finally figured out a hairstyle where that is not a big pain in the butt, because normally that would mean a lot of like putting lines in it and, and messing it up constantly. And that's embarrassing as a kid. So as an adult, I was like, okay, I got to stop doing that. Go get my haircut. But now with a lot of this up on the sides, I figured out how to do that again, and it's wonderful. It saves me time. It lets me do it on my schedule. I never remember to schedule a haircut, but also, and this is a weird thing to say, also as a kid from the '90s, and I'm going to sound like such an old man saying this, but like haircuts were like $8 in the '90s when I remember going and being like, I wish I could get a haircut every 2 weeks, because that's when you have short hair, it grows out really fast, right? And now they're like $40, and so like I am just like terrified of being like, oh, I want to make sure I look professional and all these meetings and all the good stuff I have, but So anyway, that's a weird fun fact.
Uh,
Is that
it, it's a fun fact. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I was gonna say like how they say it in Australia, like, "Hey, you have a nice salad. It's a good hair you got."
okay? There you Yeah,
So,
this is South Asian, man. My hair grows constantly, and I never want to complain about that. Obviously, love having a lot of hair, and
yeah,
people always like don't complain about that. But at the same time, it grows so fast and so thick that I have feel like I got a haircut every 2 weeks, and that is impossible with like startup schedule and other things. So just being able to, and again, maybe it's a little do it yourself attitude too. So
yeah, yeah. All right, cool. Thanks for sharing. So, where can people connect with you if they want to reach out to you?
yeah, so please check out our website, amenitieshealth.com. Amenities like your hotel amenities. That was really the concept. My email, if anybody wants to reach out, is Aasim, AASIM, at amenitieshealth.com. And anybody who's in this world of healthcare, consumerism, especially those connected to health systems that are trying to differentiate themselves in a sea of the same, that's the perfect person. We have a lot of ideas how to help those folks.
All right, you heard it, folks. It's amenitieshealth.com. We'll also put the email and Asif's LinkedIn and website in the show notes so everyone have it. And yeah, this has been great. Thank you again for coming, Asim. And we really enjoyed it. And I really think you're like, this is I like to say like the boring problems, the obvious problem are the best problems to solve. And I feel like you are doing exactly like that. And then the future that you showed me with membership, I think I'm totally bought on that, like as a patient, as an experience. So I really think this is a good big company in the making. So I have no doubt in that.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And thank you for all of those kind words.
All right, thank you.